Welcome to another episode of Loop and Live, the podcast where we dive into breaking news, share our unfiltered hot takes, and discuss anything related to diabetes technology. Brought to you by DCB, the Swiss non-profit powerhouse, spotting unmet needs in diabetes technology and translating bold ideas into real solutions, making life easier for people with diabetes. Every few weeks, there's a new headline in the news promising the fully first non-invasive, needle-free CGM device. Needles.
The Holy Grail.
The Holy Grail. We found the Holy Grail, finally. Sounds seductive. The question is, are we there yet? And I want to hear from you. Do you remember the first time that you've heard this bold claim of we've cracked non-invasive glucose monitoring?
Yeah, I can still remember it was in the early 2000s. It was a Swiss company actually called Pendragon with a Pendra watch. It was a watch worn at the wristband. It got CE mark in 2003. And it measured the glucose non-invasively with impedance. As I said, CE mark came to the market, and then the users realized that it was extremely inaccurate and never got really traction on the market. And I think 3 years later, the company was bankrupt. And they invested more than 30 million into this kind of project. So it was a very early project of these non-invasives, a lot of investment, but a complete failure.
And it's not a single story. I think since the 1980s, there's been over 200 attempts of cracking this non-invasive glucose monitoring. Most of them either quietly disappeared or gone publicly bankrupt. The FDA, I think, released a warning in 2024 that there isn't a single smartwatch or smart ring approved for measuring glucose.
Yes.
And yet there's still around 35 plus companies that work on non-invasive glucose monitoring. So clearly there's a huge, huge interest and seemingly a huge unmet need. Why?
I mean, for us people with type 1 diabetes, we also ask probably the question why, because, I mean, if we would have needle phobia, I think we would be in deep trouble. But of course, one of the key arguments is always this needle phobia, and I can totally understand that if you look into children with diabetes or the family members who have to inject the insulin for that child, I can totally understand that they would prefer if they don't have to do finger prick testing or having the CGM sensor being pushed through the skin, and if it would be non-invasively possible. And also for people with type 2 diabetes, non-insulin dependent type 2 diabetics, there I can also see if they can avoid needles, they probably would prefer that. But and there are some geographic differences. I read a story that in India, 47% of the people with diabetes have needle phobia. So it's there's also an geographic reason for it. But I think for us, do you have needle phobia?
I don't. I mean, actually, funnily enough, I do when they want to draw my blood. I hate it. I have to do it, 2 times a year, and I still really dislike it, but that's something else. That's not a CGM sensor in my arm. Mm-hmm. But I also sometimes wonder, that's easy for us to say now after 20, 30 years, because I do remember when I was diagnosed at 8 years old, and I remember the nurse telling me, we didn't have CGMs back then, it was finger pricks. And I remember them telling me, you'll have to do this 10 times plus a day for the rest of your life. And it freaked me out. And I remember sitting there as an 8-year-old child on this hospital bed trying to take blood from my own finger. Yeah. And that wasn't fun at all. And thinking about how I'll do this for the rest of my life also wasn't fun. Yeah. So I think the point of having it for kids, for example, is quite a valid one.
Yeah, I can also remember, when I was diagnosed as a person with type 1 diabetes. Actually, in Switzerland, you get your insulin, and they tell you how to do it, and then they send you directly home, so you don't stay in hospital. Yeah, and I exactly know the first time I had to inject insulin myself at home, I was sitting on my bed and discussing with myself for approximately half an hour. Until I first pushed the needle through the skin, and now actually, it's kind of a routine. So I can stand this argument for needle phobia to a certain degree.
I think also when it comes to things that are in favor of non-invasive glucose monitoring, it's obviously this topic, but it's also if we think about skin irritation, for example. For me, today, that's a much bigger problem than the needle itself. It's like wearing the adhesive, and it's also what I hear from several people, that that's something you could potentially avoid when you have non-invasive monitoring. Because I think compared to what we had to deal with 20 years ago, the CGMs, it's much less of a hassle than it used to be. Yeah. But still, it's always in the headlines. There's no month going past without reading something about a new non-invasive monitoring device that's finally cracked the code. And I think it's so interesting because there are different approaches on how to measure it, and we'll dive into that a bit later. But first, I think we should pay a visit to the non-invasive glucose monitoring graveyard, because there's some interesting stories of different companies that tried and disappeared.
Absolutely. A long time ago, there was a company and a project called GlucoWatch. It was actually from a company called Animas, at that time also known for insulin pumps, and that measured glucose using reverse iontophoresis, so that the glucose was sucked through the skin into the device and then measured enzymatically.
What does that mean? So
it pulls the glucose molecules out of the blood vessel through the skin into the device and then was measured.
Non-invasively.
Well, yeah, to a certain degree, but the big problem was you needed a very solid contact between the skin and that device, and that caused a lot of skin irritation. And of course, you can also imagine a certain delay because the glucose had to diffuse into the device. So it was delayed and therefore had an offset towards the blood glucose measurement, and of course had severe skin irritations. So it got FDA approved.
Okay.
But actually, people were not able to use it because of all these skin irritations. So a couple of years later, the company was bankrupt.
Did you ever try it?
No. It was only approved in the US, so I didn't have access to it here in Europe. Another one was a company called C8, and I really remember it was ADA. I think it was 2012 or 13. It was in the US, a big conference, and then I entered the exhibition hall. You have all the big, pharma players and everything, and then there was in the middle there was a golden pyramid. Yeah.
Humble.
Yeah, golden pyramid, and it says, "We found the Holy Grail." Yeah, can you imagine?
Yeah.
And it was also a non-invasive CGM system from a company called C8, a Raman-based technology. They got CE mark in 2012. The MARD was around the first CGM system, so around 15, 18. And then they had this big booth because they thought, okay, we found it. We got the Holy Grail.
So how did they measure it? How did it work for the user?
It was also kind of a wristband, and then it used certain way of spectroscopy to measure, which is called Raman, measured then the glucose in the blood vessel through the skin, and it didn't work out. It was not able to measure glucose under normal circumstances in real world conditions. So the company failed and also got bankrupt.
So no pyramid anymore?
No.
The year after?
No.
No?
No.
That's a shame.
Yeah. That would be a cool booth for us. No.
It's quite a cool booth.
Yeah.
But it's also quite a bold claim, and it's a bit embarrassing if you do that and then you disappear. But
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then another project, it was, a big company, Google, with their device company in the Alphabet holding called Verily. They worked on a contact lens with a glucose sensor in it. So they wanted to measure the glucose in the tear fluid. Yeah? And with that, correlate that to blood glucose. So they invested more than 100 million into this project to have these contact lenses measuring the glucose concentration in the teardrop. Unfortunately, the tear fluid concentration of glucose is not always correlated to the blood glucose because it has a certain delay. And especially when you have fast changing values, you can imagine then it would be super delayed, and that's exactly where you need the right information to make the right decision when you are a person with diabetes. So they also failed, and they stopped the project, I think, 2018. And then, of course, you can see when you go on Amazon or these kind of platforms, you see you can Google glucose watches, and you can buy glucose watches from China, claiming that they can measure blood glucose, but they can't. And they also claim they have CMAP, but they don't. And a good friend of ours, Guido Feckmann from Ulm in Germany, his team, they bought this kind of watches, put it on a banana, and measured the glucose 3 days in a row on the banana. And, in the morning, lunchtime, and in the evening, they had a glucose excursion.
So when people would usually eat.
Exactly. So but the banana didn't eat, actually.
No?
No,
Oh,
it didn't.
Shocking.
Yeah. So you can see a total fake, and these glucose watches cost 100, 200, 300 euro, dollars, but they are complete fake.
I guess that goes back to why the FDA has issued this warning in 2024, because they also started popping up on my social media.
Yeah.
It's like CE approved smartwatch.
Exactly. That was exactly the reason why the FDA came out with this announcement. Yes.
Yeah. So listening to you and hearing all these stories, apparently all these attempts have kind of failed due to similar or identical obstacles. So the question is, why is it so hard to crack the whole non-invasive game, and why do they keep failing?
Well, first of all, you have to see the physics. Technically, it's possible in the lab to measure glucose with different technologies such as Raman, infrared, near infrared, and other technologies. So that's not an issue. But then, the biology or real world comes into the equation, which is, you have to see the skin and the different types of skin and the different behavior of the skin with temperature changes, sweating, and in sweat you also have salt, which is also negatively influencing your measurement. Outside temperature changes, skin color changes, all these different variances. I always say they bring n+1 problems into your equation. So it's just too many variables which you have to manage. And that's what all of these systems fail when it comes to real life.
And it's also, if it works in a perfectly stable environment, even if that would happen, there's still so many approaches that we see where startups try to close that gap when it comes to lag time. So actually we want to go in a direction where lag time is reduced because it makes treatment harder. If I know that my glucose is dropping, I want to know as fast as possible. And I'm sometimes not sure whether I would never go for a needle-free solution if it means more lag time, for example.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we maybe need to look at the different user groups, Because I think there's a big difference still between people with type 1 diabetes and how much accuracy people with type 1 diabetes need for their management compared to, for example, type 2 diabetes.
Yeah. I mean, for people with type 1 diabetes, I can see this maybe as an additional system, or backup system. But the story is, from my point of view, completely different when you look into people with non-insulin dependent type 2 diabetes, because there the accurate value is maybe less important compared to a person with type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes, you need to know the value, because you base a lot of decisions on this value, and if the value is wrong, you might end up in a real problem. But non-insulin dependent type 2s, they don't have the risk of a hypoglycemia. So there maybe it's more important to see trends, to see how do they behave, how does the glucose behave after meal? Is it going high, super high, or not moving at all? Maybe that information is much more relevant. And then these kind of user groups, they can easily go with a maybe slightly optimized non-invasive system.
So do you think the Holy Grail is in reach?
Well, I don't think that. I mean, it depends on the user group. Yeah. I think there is possibilities for companies when they clearly define the right users for their technology. Maybe I can give you some examples. One is a company called Boitsense. It's a French company, and they measure glucose in the volatile organic compounds. So that means they measure certain molecules in the breath, and based on that, they showed already in clinical trials that they can correlate this to blood glucose. It's not super accurate at this point because they don't have enough data, but for a person with type 2 diabetes, it is maybe much easier to use the breath analysis compared to fingerstick testing or having a CGM sensor with a lot of data which they cannot really understand. So it always depends on the situation, and therefore I think some companies will have a chance to make it to the market for certain user groups.
And do you think we truly need zero needle, or is minimally invasive actually good enough?
Well, minimal invasive, so for example with microneedles, could also be good enough, but when it comes to microneedles, you need to fix those microneedles in the skin. So you need adhesives again. Coming back to that initial discussion which we had, where you said, a lot of people have skin irritations based on the adhesives. Well, with microneedles, you will have an adhesive. So you're coming back to that originally. And when you look into the current CGM systems with the very nice insertion mechanisms they now have, the latest versions, I think the difference between a microneedle-based system and a current on-the-market CGM system is rather little, I would say.
And for all the people with type 1 diabetes listening here today, how realistic is it that we'll see a fancy-looking wristband anytime soon that gives us glucose that's accurate enough to make treatment decisions?
Unfortunately, very little.
Yeah?
Yes. I don't think that in the next couple of years we will see that. And also don't forget, even if we nowadays have AI technologies, the AI technology can only predict based on the personal information, the data which are there from that one person. Because every person is so different that you can't use a standardized AI model from one person to the next person. And that makes the whole thing, even with AI, super difficult.
So what's next? What should we be excited about when it comes to non-invasive glucose monitoring?
Well, I think the companies have to really understand and start with the not showing the Holy Grail with values, but maybe start with identifying the right population and the right device to make an impact, then they have a chance to be successful. And once they are on the market and once they collect more data, maybe they have the chance to get closer to show values and then having an option to be the product for people living with type 1 diabetes, insulin-dependent type 2s.
Thank you so much for listening today on this episode of Non-Invasive Glucose Monitoring. If you know a company that maybe is not on our radar, that have found the Holy Grail despite us not being aware of it, you can send us an email to podcast@dcburn.com. Thanks for joining today. This is Derek and Greta from the DCB, and we'll be back with another episode soon.
Thank you very much.